Welcome to the Great Unlearning Channel with Chris Native.
Who am I? The perennial philosophy of Aldous Huxley. Education consists mostly of what we have unlearned. Mark Twain. The perennial philosophy, as espoused by the English writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley, is a system of thought that emphasizes the underlying unity of all things. From a non-dual perspective, this means that all things in the universe are interconnected and ultimately stem from a single source. At the heart of the perennial philosophy is the idea that all beings, regardless of their form, are part of a larger whole. This belief is based on the idea that the universe is not made up of separate and distinct objects, but rather that all things are interconnected and interdependent. In other words, the individual self is a crucial component of the larger whole rather than existing independently from it. I would love to hear your opinion on this channel. Please comment. Furthermore, the perennial philosophy holds that the ultimate reality is not material, but rather transcendent. In Huxley's view, this means that true understanding and enlightenment can only be achieved through spiritual means, such as awareness, contemplation, and enquiry. This perennial philosophy, as articulated by Aldous Huxley, is a perspective that views the world and its various esoteric religious and philosophical traditions as having a common core of truth. This esoteric truth, which Huxley referred to as the perennial philosophy, is seen as being beyond the boundaries of any one tradition and is instead something that is universal and timeless. Huxley believed that all spiritual traditions share a common goal: to discover the ultimate reality that transcends the ordinary world of appearances. This quest is often called mystical or contemplative, for it requires a profound inward journey of one's own consciousness, and a direct, intuitive perception of the oneness of all things. I call this process self-inquiry. By self-inquiry, I mean the practice of turning one's attention away from external objects and towards the subject, which is oneself. This practice leads to a clear recognition of one's own essential nature, which is pure consciousness itself, and thus reveals the unity of all things. This is true self-knowledge or knowledge of self, the most sacred and sublime form of knowledge. You can watch a previous episode on self-inquiry on the Great Unlearning Channel, episode 1. To thank you for your support on this channel in this first series, you can watch a music video of the theme song by following a link at the end of this video. In a different series, I will write a new theme track, and you can further support this channel by buying the track of every series at your chosen price. Thank you for your support. The perspective of the perennial philosophy is aligned with that of non-dualism, which I have already hinted at. Non-dualism asserts that the ultimate reality is not something outside of us, but rather something inherent within us. This idea is also expressed in various ways by different traditions, as Tao in Daoism, which emphasizes the interdependence of all things; as Atman in Hinduism, which affirms that the individual self is a manifestation of the supreme reality called Brahman; as Buddha nature in Buddhism, which teaches how to awaken the latent potential for enlightenment within us. The Western mystery tradition is a term that encompasses the esoteric wisdom and practices of various spiritual paths that originated or flourished in the West. These paths share a common heritage of Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, and other ancient teachings that reveal the hidden mysteries of existence. Among these mysteries is the secret of awakening or enlightenment, which is known by different names in different traditions. In some circles of initiates, adepts, magi, and masters who have attained this state of illumination, it is called the Christic principle or Christ consciousness. This does not refer to the literal interpretation of Christianity that prevails in many parts of the world today, with its dogmatic beliefs and rituals. Rather, it points to an inner truth that transcends any religion or creed. It is the realization through direct experience of one's true nature that awareness or pure consciousness is what you are, independent of body and mind. It is the direct recognition of one's identity with the universal spirit that pervades all things. This is what it means to be Christified, to awaken to one's divine potential through self-awareness as consciousness and manifested in one's life. This mystery reveals that a willing sacrifice or psychological transformation must occur within our own psyche. A mystical death or psychological death from the false assumption that we are the body is required, and not the external worship of ideas and concepts of any historical figures. Furthermore, the perennial philosophy teaches that there is a common essence behind all appearances, a source of wisdom and bliss that can be accessed by anyone who seeks it sincerely. We must willingly sacrifice or crucify the false assumption that we are merely a body-mind egoic character and transcend the illusory nature of the physical or objective world. This is the mystery of the true death and resurrection that must take place within us. Only then can our true self as pure consciousness alone shine forth and manifest itself. This is the core teaching of the Christified masters or great sages of all ages. Indeed, it is a perennial philosophy. Those sages of both past and present who abide in this state are typically called Christ, Buddhas, or Krishna conscious in other traditions, and these among mankind are destined to be the modern-day sages or liberated souls of our times. The emergence of what we now know in this series as Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, Krishna consciousness, or simply the recognition of our authentic, irreducible beingness is a universal phenomenon that transcends all religious boundaries. It is the recognition of our true and essential nature as pure awareness or consciousness that has profound implications for our journey of inquiry and transformation, where through a process of grace, love draws you into a deeper, expansive and more profound experience of life that reveals our innate wholeness and harmony. In essence, there really is no actual mystery at all, and some people who are fortunate enough to have had a lucid dream may intuitively grasp what awakening or enlightenment could entail, even if they are not fully aware of it. They may recall how they felt when they became lucid in their dream and how they explored the vivid and realistic world created by their own mind. They may remember the exhilaration and intensity of that experience and how they were amazed by their own creative power. Lucid dreaming can also evoke a sense of wonder and joy as the dreamer realizes that they are awake within their own mind and that everything they perceive is made of their own consciousness. It is worth knowing that the liberated soul or Jivanmukta is always conscious or awake in the waking, dream and deep sleep states. This kind of awakened or realized soul never loses consciousness or falls into gaps of blank inertness. They are always lucid, always aware of their true being and thus liberated. However, to continue, the dreamer or newly awakening consciousness on this path to understanding the self may wonder what kind of substance it is that constitutes their mind or their dream objects. This substance is consciousness itself, which is not only the substance of their mind, but also our true and essential irreducible nature. Inspired by this analogy, I will then modestly endeavor to offer you a concise insight of how awakening, realization, enlightenment, or simply the recognition of one's true being may manifest for some awakening seekers in the waking state. These exotic-sounding words, which we commonly call awakening or enlightenment, is simply the recognition of our true being. It is recognizing that your current life is also a dream in the mind of the ultimate cosmic dreamer who manifests itself as everything that exists. This ultimate dreamer is consciousness itself. I realize that my claim may seem too radical or challenging for many of us. This is because we are accustomed to a certain false and limiting belief that this consciousness is a human-like supreme entity that exists outside of us that governs the universe. There is no such external entity. There is only one consciousness in which everything that appears is included and sustained. It is the only reality that is true and always. It has no beginning and no end. Everything else is transient and impermanent. A common mistake throughout the history of religion has been to reify this consciousness and project it as a separate entity in their own likeness. But this consciousness transcends any linguistic, conceptual, or visual representation, and any attempt to capture it with such means will inevitably distort its infinite and subjective nature. In this series of episodes, even calling it consciousness is an approximation. In truth, it is beyond name and form, beyond birth and death, ever-present and self-aware. It is closer to us than we could ever imagine, and it shines within each one of our minds as our being through the feeling and the knowing that we call I am. Again, we are getting ahead of ourselves. Perhaps we can break bread on this concept of the I am in future episodes. This understanding of the perennial philosophy will always remain in contrast to more traditional, external views, which tend to see the world as being made up of separate, distinct entities. In these views, the individual self is seen as being separate from the rest of the world, and reality is viewed as being made up of a series of external, objective phenomena. The perennial philosophy, on the other hand, emphasizes the unity of the individual self and the ultimate reality, and the importance of direct, mystical experience in the pursuit of truth. This understanding offers a unique and powerful framework for understanding the nature of consciousness and provides a valuable perspective for those seeking a deeper understanding of the world and its spiritual traditions. The Perennial philosophy is a large treatise of work, and there is much in Huxley's general views that I disagree with and that I cannot reconcile in the context of the modern world. I am, however, mindful that he was a product of his time. However, there is much that I agree with too. Hidden inside this momentous work is a nectar sweet and ready in our age for the Western postmodern influenced mind. This is the nectar of the primordial teachings of non-dualism. It is here that we can begin to trace the trail where Aldous Huxley obtained his non-dualistic ideas. As a prolific and influential English writer and philosopher, Aldous Huxley explored various themes such as science, politics, religion, art and human nature in his works. Among his many interests, he was drawn to the spiritual traditions of India, especially the non-dualistic philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta is a school of Hindu thought that asserts that the ultimate reality, called Brahman, is identical to the true self of every being which we know as Atman. Brahman can be understood from the Western perspective as pure consciousness, the only reality that exists eternally and independently. All other phenomena are illusory appearances of Brahman or consciousness, created by ignorance and delusion. Huxley and others were attracted to the Advaita teachings because they offered a different perspective on reality than the Western philosophical traditions that they were familiar with. In Advaita philosophy, the goal of spiritual practice or the ultimate aim of spiritual practice is to attain moksha or liberation from the cycle of birth and death. This can be achieved by realizing the identity of one's true self, Atman, with the supreme reality, Brahman, which is pure consciousness and non-dual. In other words, one has to recognize that one's own essence is identical with Brahman, who has now been revealed in this series as consciousness, the only reality that exists. This realization is said to bring about a state of enlightenment or awakening, in which the individual becomes free from suffering and attains a state of permanent happiness and peace. Huxley and his contemporaries traveled to India to learn more about these teachings firsthand from spiritual teachers and incorporated them into their own personal practice. Their creative process was influenced by the wisdom of Indian sages like Sri Ramana Maharshi, whom I personally regard as the most profound sage of our era. I have already introduced this enigmatic person in episode 1 of this series. However, Sri Ramana would never claim such a distinction, or any other honorific, for that matter. He was humble and detached from worldly recognition. He renounced the titles of guru or master. His primary teaching was given as silence. His words were rare, but when he uttered them, they were like torrents of living water emanating from his essence. When he was merely 16 years old, his awakening happened spontaneously, where he encountered the essence of his true self, which is what I have been speaking about thus far on this channel, the universal consciousness that pervades all existence. This profound realization never left him, and he lived in constant awareness of his identity with the ultimate reality. He was indeed the awakened Buddha of our era. The sage's presence attracted seekers from every corner of the globe, who wished to bask in his serene and utter silent radiance for hours upon hours in the day. As they did so, their minds ceased their restless fluctuations and settled into a profound calmness and clarity. This was the result of his direct connection to the source of all existence, the pure silent awareness that underlies all phenomena. He recognized the same essence that he knew within himself and saw it in all beings. He attracted all kinds of creatures, lizards, bugs and even spiders, who came up to him spontaneously as if to greet him, and he always accepted them in his presence with the deepest and utmost grace as his kin. In a future series on this channel, I hope to share with you the story of one of my most esteemed and beloved silent teachers, Sri Ramana Maharshi. He was a revered sage who lived in India in the 20th century and who inspired me since my teenage years. We affectionately called him Bhagwan, which means one who is in touch with the divine essence within themselves. In the 20th century, Aldous Huxley and several Western thinkers and writers were influenced by Advaita and introduced its teachings to a wider audience through their own works. Among them were Ram Dass, Alan Watts, and Timothy Leary, who traveled to India and other Eastern countries and learned from various spiritual masters. Through their encounters with the Advaita tradition and other Eastern spiritual practices, Huxley and his contemporaries were able to develop a deeper understanding of the non-dual nature of reality and the way to spiritual realization. They brought back some form of Advaita to the West and shared their insights with others through their books, lectures, and experiments. Huxley believed that this ancient Eastern philosophy held the key to understanding the true nature of reality and achieving enlightenment. He argued that non-dualism was a perennial philosophy, meaning that it was a timeless wisdom that could be found at the heart of all major spiritual traditions. Huxley believed that this philosophy had the power to transform individuals and society by helping people to see beyond the illusion of separation and ego. I chose Huxley for this episode for a particular reason. I want to show that the ideas we are exploring are not alien to the Western mind. These ideas are ancient and timeless insights that resonate with our contemporary condition. They are primordial, even in Western philosophical thought, and are ever more relevant to us in our times. The nature and origin of consciousness have long puzzled and fascinated philosophers and scientists. However, if we assume that consciousness is an emergent property of physical processes, we may never be able to fully explain how it arises and what it entails. This is because physical processes are inherently objective and measurable, while consciousness is subjective and qualitative. Thus, there seems to be an irreducible gap between the physical and the mental realms that defies scientific reductionism. This is why consciousness is often regarded as a hard problem that challenges our current understanding of reality. You can watch a previous episode in this series on the hard problem of consciousness on this channel. The transient aspects of our existence, such as the body and the mind, do not define our true nature. There is a deeper aspect of us that remains unchanged throughout our lives and beyond. This aspect is not subject to birth or death, but transcends them. It is the essence of our being and is indubitably linked to universal being, the pure awareness that illuminates everything. We all share the same being. There is only one being, and we all share that being. Having a direct recognition that our true nature is pure consciousness, beyond the illusion of duality and separation created by the mind and body, we come to realize that we are all expressions of the same being. In this light, kindness, tolerance, empathy, decency, goodness and grace becomes a natural and effortless way of relating to each other as we see ourselves in everyone and everything. Thus, we can make our individuated journey through time and space in the current waking state more meaningful and enjoyable for ourselves and others. We are the one consciousness modulating itself into a multiplicity of apparent objects and phenomena in the physical realm. By doing so, it creates the possibility of self-awareness and self-expression through the interactions of its diverse manifestations. Thus, we are not separate entities, but expressions of the same underlying consciousness. Through self-inquiry or contemplative introspection, one can access the deeper reality of one's existence. One can discover that one is not a separate entity, but a manifestation of the one consciousness that dreams itself into various forms and experiences. One can realize the essence of one's being, which is pure awareness, bliss and peace. Overall, Huxley's perennial philosophy was his contribution to introduce the concept of non-dualism to a Western audience and to promote the idea that this ancient wisdom held the primordial key to enlightenment. In conclusion, it teaches us that everything is interconnected and that there is no separation between the self and the universe. It suggests that the individual ego is an illusion and that the true nature of reality is a unity of all things. From this perspective, consciousness is not something that is limited to the individual mind, but rather it is a universal and boundless awareness that pervades all of existence. This understanding of consciousness challenges the traditional Western view of the self as a separate and isolated entity and invites us to see ourselves as a part of a larger whole. Ultimately, the concept of non-duality invites us to transcend the limited and ego-based ways of thinking and to experience a deeper sense of oneness with all of existence through awareness of the self. It encourages the seeker to let go of the illusion of separation and to embrace our true nature as inseparable from the universal consciousness. In this way, awareness of self has a profound impact on our understanding of consciousness and offers us a new way of seeing ourselves and the world around us. It invites us to awaken to a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in life and to live in a way that is more compassionate, loving, and interconnected and lead us to the ultimate liberation. So, what does liberation have to do with consciousness? That is the question we need to explore to continue our investigation into this phenomenon. Join me next time as we explore this subject of consciousness even deeper by understanding the central idea of liberation.